and I'll hand it over to Rabii. Please take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Omar. And thank you everyone else who's taken the time out on a Saturday evening to join us. Cool. So I'm gonna jump in with a quick introduction, tell you guys a little bit about myself, and then hopefully tell you guys a bit about day-to-day life as a consultant, which I have a limited experience of because I haven't really started yet. And then probably talk a little bit about like my approach with the application process and sort of any tips I might have for you guys there as well. So cool. Yeah. So by way of introduction, so I'm Rabii. I grew up in the UK, but I am now an incoming consultant for McKinsey in the Middle East office. Specifically, I'm going to be starting off in Dubai and probably transitioning to Riyadh towards the end of next year. Like I said, I grew up in the UK and I studied at Oxford. So I just graduated last summer, the summer that just passed. I was studying PPE, philosophy, politics and economics. It was a lot of fun. While I was there, sort of my main interests were like outside my degree were like tech and entrepreneurship. So I spent a lot of my time doing like hackathons and like startup competitions and stuff like that. I have no technical background, and so I was more on like strategy, business model development, building partnerships, etc. side. In terms of what I did while I was at university, which I think helped my application, I was super engaged with a lot of student societies. The Oxford Union is a public speaking and debating society, so I spent a lot of time doing that. That was a really good experience because I sort of used that and pointed towards that to say, hey, I can work with clients, because that was glorified events management, because we were basically organizing speaker events, right? And so, and the thing is, it's harder than you'd realize, right? There's a lot of coordinating with people. There's a lot of making sure people turn up. There's a lot of advertising, etc. And so that's the sort of big experience that I pointed to say that I could work with clients. And then the other big thing that I spent a lot of my time on, and I think was a major part of my application, was in my second year, I was part of a team that started a startup. We're still working on it, but we're building a platform to help people figure out the best skills to learn and then recommend ways to learn those skills to create some competition in the online course space, because right now there's a lot of, the key differentiator is sort of like marketing there. And so we thought, can we bring some data into the picture? That was really cool. We worked on that for about 2 years, built some really interesting partnerships, built a lot of iterations of our platform, and we ended up getting some funding from the Department for Education for that as well. So there was a lot to speak about there as well. That hopefully gives you guys a little bit about the sort of things I'm interested in. In terms of McKinsey, so, actually, I think at this moment, I'll probably talk about, why consulting, why McKinsey, why Middle East. Those are 3 questions, that are probably relevant to everyone and will help you guys make a decision in terms of what it is that you might want to apply for, where you might want to apply, etc. In terms of why consulting, for me, I know I want to go back into startups, but I want to get a bit more of like a corporate insight. I thought consulting was the best way to do that. Really, I only saw consulting and banking as like realistic options for me, as someone who's more quantitative and someone who was actually interested in like the business and financial world. In terms of those 2 things, I decided to go for consulting because it's a little bit more varied. Changez can speak about this later on, but there's a lot of jumping into working with different clients, and that allows you to sort of stay on your toes. And that's something that was really appealing to me. In terms of why McKinsey, from my perspective, I sort of, initially I didn't know very much about consulting, and McKinsey was the firm that everyone spoke about. I ended up taking part in something called McKinsey Leadership Academy, which some of you may be familiar with, just before I started university. And ever since that experience, I knew that, I met a lot of the people that worked there, and I knew that I wanted to sort of jump back in there and work with those amazing people. And then finally, in terms of why the Middle East office, when I started university, my brother moved out to Dubai and my parents followed soon after. And so I spent the better part of 6 months of the past 3 years in the region. And I've had a lot of exposure into startups and entrepreneurship here as well. And so it's also given me an opportunity to still kind of distantly, but reconnect with Pakistan, where my family is originally from. And so all of those opportunities sort of for me meant that it made sense for me to apply for the Middle East office. That said, I have a good reason for it, but for a lot of people, you might want to just do it because you want to try something new. And if that's you, like, I highly, highly recommend it. Moving to another country is a really difficult thing to do. I haven't completely done it yet. I was lucky that my family was already here, but I definitely recommend it. It's going to be a really growing experience. So if that's something you're interested in, do it. And if you're specifically interested in the Middle East office for any of these consultancies, feel free to ask me any sort of further questions on that in the Q&A. Cool. So like I said, that's me. Number two, I think I'll just talk a little bit about, sorry, I wrote this down somewhere. Yes, in terms of life as an analyst. So to give you a little bit more context, right now, between graduating and joining McKinsey, which will be in January, in those 6 months, I'm currently working as an analyst at a venture capital fund here in the Middle East. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about as an analyst is going to come from that experience, as well as what I know from all the people in my network who are working at top consultancies, etc. In terms of day-to-day life, like I said, it varies a lot, and it is dependent by the stage you are on your project. So McKinsey is mainly focused on management and strategy projects. So what that means is that we're really looking at what are the sort of milestones in the next 2, 3, 5 years? How can we get to wherever we want to go? So if it's a scale up 5-year-old company that's raised $100 million, we might be telling them, okay, these are the things that you need to be doing to develop your business so that you can successfully IPO in, say, end of year 4, if that's their internal target. And that's the sort of things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But as you can imagine, it varies. The work you're doing, both in terms of the actual work and in terms of the skills you're using, they vary a lot depending on the project lifecycle. I like to think of it in 3 main ways. Consultants love the number 3, so I'll just follow that cliche. The first is sort of onboarding, right? That maybe let's just talk about it as a 6-week project. That might be your first 1 or 2 weeks. You'll have that initial touch point with the client. You'll understand what is the problem that they're looking at. You'll try and articulate the problem and understand the industry. And you'll spend that first week really just getting to know everything you can about the industry that they're in. And you would have already been doing this pre-joining the project anyways. But normally firms have sort of internal knowledge banks. So they will have like previous projects that they've done that are similar. They will have sort of readings that you can do on the region, on the types of companies, etc. And so you will basically have a lot of homework to do that first week and figure out what is the strategy for the project for the next 5 weeks or so. Once you do that, you'll have a lot of this just getting to know the client, building that relationship early on. The second stage would be like the bulk of the project. That's where you do a lot of the heavy lifting. Now that's where you'll be collating both primary and secondary research to help you make your decisions. Primary research can take many forms. So the one thing, the example that I'm going to be talking about is exactly what I mentioned, a scale-up company that's raised $100 million and is looking to IPO in 3 to 4 years. For them, we wanted to understand we'd want to understand sort of what changes they can make to their business model to increase their revenue in line with the projections they need to hit their 3 or 4 year IPO. And to do that, what we would do is, at least in this case, what we did is we rolled out a survey to get an understanding of what are the key pain points of the existing customers and how can we increase the average revenue per existing customer. And like I said, now bulk of that 3 or 4 weeks, we knew that was going to be our primary research, and then we obviously did a lot of secondary research, a lot of report reading, etc. In the primary research, we would design that questionnaire with internal experts on survey design, etc. And we then roll that out with a partner firm who's focused on ensuring that we get a representative sample and one that works the right size for us. When that information comes back, then what we would do is, we would see what are the insights for that data, how can we present those insights, and how does that fit into the wider strategy. In those 2, 3, 4 middle weeks, what you'd really have is a lot of different work streams, right? So for example, the work stream I just described is primary research, but perhaps there might be a secondary research work stream. Perhaps there might be an internal research work stream. That might be one way it might be broken down. And then we would have our sort of tasks at the beginning of every week, go through them at the end of every week. We do a brainstorming session and see how, where are we getting to in terms of solving the problem and what suggestions do we have. As you can imagine, as you go throughout the weeks, you get a clearer and clearer picture of what strategy we're going to be pitching. And, as we get towards those, even from the beginning, we'll start, our sort of first major question is, how are we presenting this to the client, right? We might have a hunch on something, but we need to make sure that it's presented in a way which is usable, understandable, and convincing. And so we'll be building slides right from the get-go. you know, initially, if we've just designed the survey and we know that there's one question that's going to be super important, you can already develop a slide template with that question as the header, or whatever the key insight might be as the header, right? But as you get more and more information, you can flesh that out more and more. And then we'd probably say the last couple of weeks or last week or so to really build out the sort of the final deck, the final presentation, and then any other collateral we'll be giving them needs to be cleaned, because a lot of this data is quite messy. It needs to be cleaned, it needs to be visual, it needs to be usable. And so the last sort of week or so is used on that. And we have a lot of resources at our disposal to get that done as well. It's up to us to figure out what are the key insights and what is the slide design. But we have internal staff who are experts at making sure it looks clean and is fitting the firm's sort of branding, etc. So the boring work we can sort of outsource, luckily, and then the interesting stuff where it's more problem solving, that's sort of more up to the team. In terms of as an analyst, I think it's worth sort of mentioning, you're obviously not going to be sort of the most senior person, but you get a surprising amount of insight into the client and the problem that they've put forward. The teams that we have at McKinsey in particular are super small. So you'll have anywhere from like as small as 3, and very rarely will you have like upwards of 6. Obviously, if there's like a global project that's like huge, you might have more people, but really somewhere between 3 to 6. And that means you get a lot of exposure into the client and into more senior staff members. A lot of the work you will be doing is going to be a little bit less sexy, essentially, right? You may be given 1,000 survey responses and be told, okay, can you make this usable, right? And maybe the survey responses are open text, right? They're not even like quantitative or anything, right? You need to go through that and understand, how can I clean that data? How can I sort the data? Maybe you identify 5 or 6 trends, and then you can start sorting that data. That might be like what you might do for like half a day, right? And on the one hand, a lot of people might find that quite tedious and quite boring. But on the other hand, this is also because you're working on such a small with such a small team. These things are actually going to lead to tangible impact, right? You can see how that 4 hours of work is going to translate into a usable data set, which is then going to translate into a usable insight, which is going to translate into usable recommendation, and then somewhere down the line, hopefully a successful IPO as well, that you can at least partially take credit for, right? Obviously, the other sort of thing I wanted to mention there on the day-to-day life is a lot of firms, and McKinsey I can definitely speak to, but I'm sure Elixir is similar, have a very flat hierarchy, especially early on in the case. Very few consultants have seen the exact same problem twice in their life. They may have seen very similar things and be able to pattern recognize, but very few people have seen the exact same thing. And so you can really speak up and add a lot of value. So to give you an example on the brainstorming side, right? Initially, we would do a lot of hypothesis brainstorming. And so what that will be is we'll be looking at, we'll ask ourselves certain questions and we'll be saying, okay, what are the potential answers to this question, right? So that we can have a hunch that we can start exploring going forward. The great thing about that is that forum, even through Zoom, is so open and is so accessible, and you will be called on in a group of 5 or 6 people. Even if you're the most junior person, you will be called on. You need to prepare, and you will be able to make usable and useful recommendations and sort of support that part of the case. Obviously, as you go down and as the work streams are articulated, your work gets more and more focused. But once again, I love the way that those two things really work in tandem. I know I'm speaking a lot about being an analyst, but now I'm just going to sort of wrap up with a couple of other things. So number one, I'm going to talk about my experience applying to consulting, and then number 2, what tips I might have. So I initially applied for a consulting role for the summer internship in my second year. I applied to a lot of consultancies. With McKinsey, I got to the final round and I didn't get their offer. I got a couple of other offers, but I ended up working on my startup over the summer. The second time around, which was at the end of my 3rd year, I applied again, and I applied to a lot of other firms, but with McKinsey, the process was as follows. So number 1, there was just a CV screening. So that was pretty simple. I already had that CV ready and I sent that out. On CV screening, the sort of big tip I have is just make sure it's really legible and your key experiences are sort of easy to find. A lot of people either fill it up with so much information that that it's really hard to understand who you are and who you are as a person. So if you think about it, right, like would you have the same amount of information as the thing that you're most proud of and the thing that you're least proud of? A lot of people, I say least proud of, but like obviously like not as proud of, right? Would you have the same amount of information? It shouldn't be taking up the same amount of real estate, right? Don't be afraid to just drop one bullet point on if it's something that you worked on for 3 months and is a smaller part of your application. So I just think just making sure that it's like someone could look at it and within 60 seconds say, okay, this person studies this thing and is interested in these 3 things, and based off of these things, I probably would guess that their strengths are in whatever, right? There's a lot of great CV templates, and I'm sure InState has a lot that they're sort of sharing as well. So that shouldn't be a hurdle. Feel free to reach out to people, reach out to me as well. Honestly, if you send me your CV, I'm gonna be absolutely honest with you right now. I will look at it, but I will not look at it for more than 3 minutes. And that's the same as that. You should expect that anyone will be doing that. Obviously, ideally, later down the process, they will be reading it in more depth, but it should be readable in 3 minutes, that I understand who you are and what your motivations are in terms of the application. So that's a CV. Second stage is a gamified test that they have. It's called the Analyst test. McKinsey previously used to have something called a problem-solving test, which was quite notorious. They've replaced it with this. This is done remotely online, and it's interesting. It's a game. It's literally a game, as a lot of people say gamified, and what they mean is like there's like a point system and it's still a test. This is literally a game, right? There are 3 stages, and it varies a little bit, but I'll give you a sort of overarching view of what you can expect. So stage 1 is you need to build an ecosystem. So you'll see you see water and you'll see land, and you'll receive a lot of indicators, and you will receive a lot of information about animals that can live in that ecosystem, what other animals they might eat and consume, and the amount of calories they need, and the amount of calories they would give if they were consumed, right? Based off all this information, you need to create an ecosystem and place it somewhere on the map. The next thing that you have is disaster management. Once again, you get a lot of information, a lot of signals on the side of your screen, and you get information about which signals correspond to which disaster. And as you get more and more signals as time goes on, and you need to just narrow down which disaster it is as quickly as possible. And then very finally, you have in the same vein, it's an animal ecosystem style tower defense game. Now, I'm not sure if anyone here has played a tower defense game, but it's the same as something like Plants vs. Zombies, or there's another tower defense game that I used to play ages ago called Balloons. I would highly recommend that in advance of taking this test, you actually play those games. When you ever played them previously, you probably didn't think about it particularly strategically. But now that you're going in there and thinking, okay, what are the rules that I need to be following, or what are the sort of heuristics that I need to develop, you'll understand that there is a strong strategy and something that you can almost formalize just by playing those games. I wouldn't recommend spending too much time, but spend an hour playing these 2 games, and you'll just be in the zone and in the mood, and it won't be something new, right? So that's for the tower defense side. In terms of the ecosystem building and the other games, it's very difficult to prepare for, but as you'll be applying to other consultancies as well, I do recommend you just do a lot of online tests and develop your numerical reasoning, because those skills are transferable. And then the final recommendation I have on that is there's another game called Plague Inc. Obviously, it's a bit bittersweet in today's world, but the idea is that you create a disease and you have to like infect the whole world. Obviously, I'm very cognizant that that is particularly topical, and for some people maybe quite emotional topic, so don't mean to offend anyone, but it really is a great preparation for the ecosystem building, because once again it's a game, right? And if you previously played it, you probably wouldn't think of it too strategically, but as you play it, you'll realize that there are ways that you can do better in the game, and those are things that are repeatable as well. It's not actually down to luck as much as it might feel like, right? And it's the same thing with the ecosystem building. The third stage and the final stage are 2 stages of interviews. So if you are applying for an office that you are local to, you will have a first round and a final round. If you're applying to an office that you're not local to, they might fly in and do interviews. Obviously, this is I'm talking post-COVID. Otherwise, it will just be over Zoom. But your first round of interviews, you will have 2 of them. They will be with engagement managers. Engagement managers, to give context, would be someone who is, so you'd spend maybe 2 years as an analyst, 2 years as an associate, and then you'd be an engagement manager. Those are the people that manage projects. Those are sort of people that are in charge of projects. And then you'd have another 2 interviews. Those interviews are with partners and senior partners. Those are the people who are in charge of bringing in projects. They are in charge of building the brand of the company. They'll do a lot of thought leadership pieces, and they've been engagement managers for some time generally, or they may have laterally transitioned in from another firm. In terms of those interviews, all the interviews take the same structure. So I'm just going to have to explain the interviews once, luckily, because I'm aware that my time is running out. In terms of cases for McKinsey, everything I'm talking about is McKinsey in particular. There are slight variations amongst firms. McKinsey interviews are 40 minutes long. The first 15 to 20 minutes will be the personal experience interview. The personal experience interview is quite interesting. It's the same as any interview you might have for like competencies, but the only difference is that they will only ask you a single question, and they will ask you to speak about it for about 10 or 15 minutes. And that's a long time, right? Because a lot of the answers we normally have are only 2 or 3 minutes. The thing I'd recommend there is really make sure you get all of your story out, get all of your story down. In preparation, I would recommend you do is prepare a story for each, prepare 4 or 5 stories across your 2 interviews. Try not to repeat your stories. The sort of questions you want to be answering are, what is the achievement that you're most proud of? Tell me about a time where you worked in a team. Tell me about a time where you overcame a challenge. Tell me about a time where you failed and how you sort of responded to that. A lot of these are, tell me about a time where you went above and beyond. A lot of these are variations on really the same question. And so a lot of the stories can be used for any of these things. In terms of the stories you prepare, I recommend you write your story down. I recommend you get it down to like a 1 or 2 minute version. And then I recommend you ask yourself and bullet point it out. I recommend you go, once you've done that, do this on a Word doc. Once you've done that, go through each bullet point and say, okay, ask yourself, why did I do this thing? What could I have done differently? How did other people respond to me? And it's all about getting out things like empathy, leadership, personal experience, personal impact, drive and achieving, entrepreneurship. These are the things that you want to be showing in each of these bullet points. Once you do that, that should take you about an hour or so per story. I then recommend you go and do the story with a lot of different people. You want to be getting people who are going to be prompting you, who are going to be interrupting you after about 2 or 3 minutes to really dive deep, right? So after about 2 or 3 minutes into the story, they will start asking you questions like, okay, what could you have done differently? Why did you do this certain part of the story? What was your motivation? This person specifically that made you react like that. So there's a lot there. I'm getting told to shut up. So give me 1 sec. I'll wrap this up. The final bit is the actual case itself. I know I'm not leaving very much time for it, but I'm sure Changez is going to speak about it, and I'm sure a lot of people will have Q&A questions about it as well. The cases, there's a lot of resources available online for cases. Once again, I'm sure InState has some of them. The biggest piece of advice I had there is just practice. Practice with people as much as possible. As you get towards doing your actual case interview, practice with people who have secured offers or are already consultants, because that's the best practice you'll get. And I recommend you should have like 20 to 30 cases under your belt at least before you go into do your final rounds. And in terms of that, I will be sharing some resources that I have with the InState team that they can share with you guys as well. Just a quick final point. There's only 3 steps to it. First, get acquainted with the basics of cases. Read a book. You can read Victor Cheng's Case Interview Secrets. You can read Case in Point. There's a lot of examples. Just read one book. Don't take notes. Just read it so you can jump straight into doing practice. The second thing is just practicing. Do 20 cases. And then the final thing is focus practice. What I mean by that is do a very detailed, thorough post-mortem of every case and ask yourself, did I perform on the communication, the numerical side, the conclusion, whatever? Come up with your own framework and ask yourself, did I perform in those verticals? And then keep doing cases like that. Do another further 10 like that. I guarantee you, if you follow that 3-step process, you will be better than 95% of people, and you will perform very, very well, and you'll be very well placed to secure an offer at a top consultancy. Apologies for running over, but yeah, that's sort of everything for me.
Thanks for that, Rabii. There's like really interesting insights there. And I really hope everyone's been taking notes, and this is your opportunity to ask key questions about the McKinsey application process and get great insights from a successful candidate. So yeah, I hope everyone's going to really utilize this opportunity. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Changez to tell you a bit about Elixir.
Awesome. Omar, how long do I have again?
They'll just take to about 50 past.
Okay, cool. So firstly, hi everyone. Thank you InState for having me. Can I just quickly request that if those are comfortable with sharing this, their faces, if they could, I just prefer to know if people are disgusted by what I'm saying or they're happy with what I'm saying. But I'll jump right in. So I'll break this down into 3 different stages. So I'll firstly quickly talk about Elixir and what we're doing and who we are. Just because I feel like a lot of you may not know who we are. Then I'll jump into the application process and a bit about that and how I got here. And then I'll hopefully be able to touch on what I'm doing, because I think that's quite a cool piece, a cool project to be on, and can provide a bit more insight as to what you can expect to be doing at Elixir. Cool. So Elixir is a strategy consultancy firm that's based in the UK, and we serve a very global client base. So we've got operations across Australia, South Africa. We've covered all across Europe, and the US is a rapidly expanding market for us. I think last week we hired 10 more people for the US. We were born right outside of a financial crisis, so 2009, and we went public a few months ago, and we were the only company to do so within the UK. It's quite peculiar for a consultancy to go public. We still are operating in our partnership model, but we're just floating part of our company on the alternative investment market. The reason for doing so is twofold. Firstly, yes, to get the CEO and partner some of the assets liquidated, but also secondly, to bolster our acquisition strategy and accelerate that. So one of Elixir's many goals over the next coming years is to become a house of brands. So in 2018, prior to us going public, we acquired a company called Den, which is a creative digital agency. And a few months ago, right after us going public, we acquired a company called Coast Digital, which is a marketing agency. So we have a really compelling and complete offering for our clients. So Elixir can define the strategy, and then they can work closely with Den to build the product, and then work with Coast to market and identify, what are the consumer trends and wants and demands. So that's a bit about Elixir. We call ourselves a challenger consultancy. We're very implementation oriented. For those who are aware of Newton, think of us as the strategy consultancy relative to Newton's operational consultancy. We like driving change, and that's where our specialization is, implementing the strategy. We also operate very much like a startup. Yes, we were born in 2009, but we are a scale, but we operate like a startup. Our culture is very much that. And that's a lot of the round I applied. So since I'm talking about why I applied and how I did, I may as well dive into that now. So I'm not sure if many of you can kind of relate to this, but during university, I wasn't exactly sure as where I wanted to go. I was thinking investment banking just because a few of my mates were saying that. I was thinking training contracts, a few of my mates were saying that. So, I entered at investment banks during the summer of my second year, investment bank called Investec. I really didn't like it. And so I thought, why not do a bit of research into consultancy and startups as well. So I was kind of torn between the two. I didn't really know much about either. Like all of you, I come from a state school. The only connection to the professional world is my second uncle. And that's it. My mum's a supply teacher, so I didn't really know or have much transparency into what happens in consultancy. But I thought it was cool. So I was doing my research. I wasn't too rigorous at it. I was a bit lazy. But I found Elixir, and the way I found Elixir was, I'm not sure if you guys know the grenade carb killer bars. I was really interested in those. So I just looked up the CEO, tried to find an interview of him. And I saw an interview of him being interviewed on a plane. So this guy was interviewing on the plane. I was like, Jesus Christ, what the hell is this? Turns out the interviewer was the CEO of Elixir. So I was like, if this guy is interviewing people on planes, this company must be pretty sick. And lo and behold, it is. So yeah, Elixir are challenger consultancy. They operate like a startup, and they also work very closely with startups. So I'll get into that in a bit. But I applied in January time, right before the pandemic. The first stage is a CV screening, a cover letter, and then this very, very annoying question, which if you go on our website, you can see it is, what can you bring to Elixir? And then in brackets, they'll say something like, please be creative in your answer. So a lot of people are very puzzled by this and actually put off by applying, but they really want you to be creative in your answer. So when I was at the assessment center, I asked people what they did. Some people made actual puzzles, sent that the Elixir office, and when people put the puzzle together, it spelled out why they would make a great analyst. Some people made full-on websites to showcase their capabilities. I made a video, so I had a bit of background in creative design and things of that nature, so I thought I'd make a video. They liked it. They gave me a call. It was a very casual chat. You know, what are my motivations? I wouldn't call it an interview. It was just a, you know, congratulations, you're through to the assessment center, but can I ask a few questions? Obviously it was marked, but you know, they made it very casual. So the assessment center is quite weird. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the case studies and in their you know, normal sense. I can't speak to the MBB case studies. The assessment center was 3 group case studies, and they were all creative cases. So it's super interesting stuff. Every single one of the cases was work that Elixir did. And so, you know, to name a few of them, one was a go-to-market strategy. The other was identifying whether a private bank should close down their current account. So it was really, really cool case studies. There was around 30 people there, and only one got through. Surprise, it was me. So, you know, it was a really interesting day. Following that, they gave me another call and said, you know, come in for a day, and they didn't really provide me any information as to what would happen. So the day before the actual day I was meant to come in, they pinged over an email saying, hey, can you work on this case for us, please? Which was really baffling, but it was, you know, a 24-hour case. I made a deck, and then I went in and presented it to the principal. Her name's Fabiana. She's very cool. Thankfully, I had already had a conversation with Fabiana just by messaging her on LinkedIn and asking whether we can have a coffee chat. So yeah, I presented my solution to their challenge. Then it was a one-on-one interview with the head of HR. His name's Steve Leeson. It was a really, really intense interview. I think Steve gives a very strong indication of what type of people are at Elixir. He'd ask me questions like, if you could be an animal, what animal would you be and why? If you could teach me one thing in one day, what would you teach me and why? And he never gave me any, you know, indication that I was doing well or poorly. And I think you'd get that across every single consultancy interview. And he never stopped for pauses. It was question after question, but apparently that went well. So, you know, I thought it went well. And then a 4-month break happened. And that was because of the pandemic. So the pandemic hit, I didn't hear anything. I emailed, I called. They said, you know, it's positive, but, you know, we can't say anything for sure right now. And so I panicked. I was like, okay, all the applications are closed. And then Deloitte opened up. So I applied to them, got an offer from them, and I accepted it. And so then it was July. I was disappointed that I couldn't get into Elixir, but, you know, Steve was like, let's keep in touch. And then they gave me a call and said, can you start tomorrow? So that was kind of baffling, but, you know, that's how Elixir do things. Had to call up Deloitte and reject them, even though I signed a contract, which was a very awkward conversation. And so here I am now. Now, before I dive into what I'm actually doing as an analyst, are there any questions? Like, you can cut me off. Feel free to tell me to shut up and go somewhere else. But are there any questions so far? I'm going to leave a 5-second pause, and then I can dive into the project.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. Why did you choose Elixir over Deloitte?
Yeah, great question. I should have probably touched on that. I don't want to work for a big firm. This is just a personal preference. I want to work for a firm in which I'm able to deliver value and see that value. I don't want it to have to trickle up to a principal who then presents their solution to a client. I want to be right there presenting it as well. And that's a lot, you know, it speaks to what Elixir are like. Complete flat hierarchy. As an analyst, on my first week, I was presenting a solution to a client. I am client facing consistently, and that's enabled me to build really strong relationships throughout my time. As well as this, there is no training program at Elixir at all. On the first day, you're expected to deliver value. There is no how to Excel, how to PowerPoint, how to present. And that's the best way I learn. I learn by messing up and then, you know, iterating from there. And, you know, Elixir's at a really, really interesting stage. We just went public. We acquired 2 more companies. We're building brands and products to deliver to our clients. So we recently built a product called Indaba, which is essentially a return to work platform. It operates on the blockchain. You have all your health data on, and you get a weekly test. So you do a test a week, and then you can go into the office. It's a sick company. I think they're doing cool things, and I get a lot of exposure. So that's why I looked over to Deloitte. Does that answer your question well?
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Anyone else? Cool. So I have slides, but I'm not going to share them just because I think I can voice it over a bit better. So obviously I can't disclose who the client is, but just to give you a fair bit of context, and you can probably research and find out who it is. We are currently working for a FTSE 50 CPG / tobacco manufacturer. Super interesting client. They're currently undergoing a very public strategic shift away from their combustible cigarettes and more so towards their reduced risk products. So this includes vapes, e-cigarettes, modern oral tobacco, tobacco heated products. And then 5 years down the line, they're looking to engage in active consumables. And by this, I mean energy drinks, sleep enhancers, mood management, essentially. And so we've been appointed by the global CIO to accelerate this digital transformation by showcasing innovative startups and technologies that can tackle key challenges that both the functional leadership and the regional leaderships are facing. And so we do this through what we call virtual immersions, which sounds really swanky and everything, but all it is a 6-hour workshop in which they engage with startups. So there'll be startup speed dating. They engage with venture capital firms. They'll engage with industry leading speakers. And after this workshop, we'll then do a few design thinking sprints to identify what the opportunities we saw at that event, build use cases, and then start proof of concepts. So they'll partner with these startups, identify what are the key KPIs we want to hit, what do we want to do with this company, run that POC, finish it, and then they identify, did we hit those KPIs and do we want to scale up with this organization? So that is the program we're currently running. And we are doing it with the 120 global leaders of the firm. They call it the GL120, which is a very cool name. And so this is both at a functional level, so finance, operations, legal, as well as the regional leadership team. So the APME leadership team, the Asia Pacific, Australia, UK, Europe, you name it. Since I've been here, we've done 13 of these. I've ran personally 5 of these, which is quite cool as an analyst. And we've introduced over 120 startups to this company. We've built 50 proof of concepts, and we're currently running them, so it's very, very busy. And of those 50 proof of concepts, 12 of those have gone into the scale-up solution, which is the minimum contract for that being £500,000. So it's a lot of success, and there's a lot of appetite in our client to innovate. It's a super interesting client. To speak to the process in 8 minutes and what I will do at each point. So we start off by liaising with the client. We'll identify who wants a virtual immersion next. Let's say, for example, it's the finance leadership team. So we'll then interview around 10 of their global leadership team, which in my personal opinion, I think is overkill, but whatever. And so it will actually be the analysts that are conducting the interview themselves. And you're speaking to people that are 2 below the management board. So very, very senior. They're all budget holders. And so you'll identify, what are your key challenges? What would you like to get solved during this virtual immersion? What keeps you up at night? What have you done to already tackle these challenges? And what were your key learnings from this? And so it's probably important to note that, yes, that is for the virtual immersion. But a lot of the times we're speaking to budget holders that are telling us their key problems. So from a business development standpoint, that's super valuable. So we'll say, that's great. And then we'll engage our innovation ecosystem. So another thing that drew me to Elixir is that they have a very comprehensive innovation ecosystem. And by that, I mean they have exclusive partnerships with over 200 venture capital firms around the world, accelerators, incubators. And so to name a few, and you guys might have known of them, Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia Capital, Lightspeed, True Global. Those are some of the big names that we work very, very closely with. And so they've given us the challenges. We'll then go to this VC network, innovation network, and say, these are the challenges that our client are facing. Can you think of any technologies, any startups that can solve for this? I should preface this so I don't sound like an events manager, that when they're outlaying their challenges, what happens is that this client, they're quite old school, and so they can't quite clearly articulate or identify what technologies they're after. So I'll give you an example. This is a cool example. Let's say you're working with any sort of CPG in the world. The one thing that they lack in comparison to a retailer is first-party consumer data. They don't own the point of sale. They can't identify that Rabii bought a pack of cigarettes from a local Bossman shop. They can't ever tell you that. The retailer can, but they can't. And this is the case with Unilever, P&G, whoever you name, right? They don't have that data, and that data is so valuable to identify consumer trends and build better propositions. So our client at one point said, you know what, I want to get that. And that's a very, very tricky challenge to tackle. And if someone did actually tackle that comprehensively, they'd be looking at a unicorn. But regardless, so we try and identify what could actually solve this problem. What technologies can we do to solve this? So for us, we came up with QR codes, which is super interesting, right? So put a QR code on a packet of cigarettes. Obviously, for legal reasons, we realize you can't actually do this. But let's say, for example, one of their reduced risk products, so a vaping device, you scan that vaping device and then you can fill out a feedback form and get reward points. Very simple way to do so, but regardless, it's something that they didn't have in their minds. So then we'd speak to our VC network and say, do you have any QR code companies? They'd say yes. And then we'd brief them on the opportunity. So the analysts themselves will say, listen, this is the opportunity, this is the client, and this is how you present your solution. So like I said, it's startup speed dating. So it's not like the typical, hour-long meeting these companies get with the clients. It's very quick and fast-paced. And it's very cool. You're speaking to CEOs of very, very cool companies and telling them how to present their solution. I think that's super interesting stuff. And it does take a certain level of skill and critical thinking as well. So we'll coach them throughout the week and say, this is how you should best pitch. They'll then pitch at the virtual immersion event, which is a 6-hour workshop, like I mentioned. And then during the wrap up of that event, we're trying to identify what were the most compelling solutions, who do you want to run a proof of concept with. And then following that, we'd also, identify the proof of concept, define the KPIs, and build that partnership. I just glossed over that, but that's a very, very hard thing to do in a global organization, which is very large, over 100,000 employees. There's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, a lot of processes that makes it very difficult for startups to want to work with them. So we've also worked very closely with the legal and finance functions to identify ways to accelerate that process. So that's a bit about what I've done as an analyst on the project. Now, I should mention as well that, excuse me, there's a lot of other things that you can do as an analyst at Elixir. Very recently, an analyst was able to leverage her personal network and actually sell to a client. That is her client alongside of partners. It's something that a lot of other consultancies don't practice or at least encourage. The analysts at Elixir are empowered to take initiative as well, develop your own marketing, develop your own propositions as well. And so, that's kind of speaks to other pieces and other benefits I've found at being an analyst at Elixir. So one of the things that I've also been able to do is actually develop my own video series for Elixir. It's actually on our YouTube and our LinkedIn. Please check it out and give it a like, maybe a comment as well. It's called, I can't remember what it's called actually, Internship Experience at Elixir. I think that's what it's called. It's just a 2-part series, but what that has enabled us to do as analysts at Elixir is grow our name in the firm. And I think that's a key thing. When you get into the working environment, building a personal brand as soon as you get in is super important. Yes, Elixir doesn't have much politics and it's a flat hierarchy, but you still need to be known as an on-job bloke. So, I definitely recommend that as well. So yeah, I've rambled on. It wasn't the most structured, but, I prefer questions. So I'll stop there. If you have any questions from myself and Rabii, please do fire away.
That was super interesting. I think we can all agree Elixir seems really cool. And yeah, I hope you all took some great insights from that. In terms of questions, if you can all use the hands up function in Zoom, For those of you that don't know how to use that, click on participants, and there should be a put your hand up function. And then, yeah, we'll just go through that list. So if anyone has any questions, put your hand.
They're probably still taking notes.
Yeah.
So.
And also, just to start us off, so Changez, if someone wanted to really hit the ground running at Elixir, because it seems like you really get thrown into the deep end, how could they prepare to really do that?
Yeah, I mean, so I did a few things. I'm not sure how much benefit it actually gave me, but practicing my presentation skills, really actually learning how to use Excel, things like that helped. Elixir really value people who are confident and charismatic and able to present as well. So I tried to hone that in. So yeah, things like that kind of helped. I guess also, you never know what project's really gonna get put on. Every single project requires a completely different skill set. So I spent and poured hours on Excel and trying to find out ways I can make cool models and stuff. But turns out this project I'm on doesn't really use that well. The only reason we would use Excel is project management and filling out Gantt charts and things like that. But the day-to-day, I never use it. But whenever I do have to use it, it's a learn on the job kind of thing. But I think it's a good start to practice those skills and polish those.
Okay. If anyone has any question at this point, you can just unmute yourself and jump straight in. And whilst we wait for anyone to brainstorm questions, I also have a question for you, Rabii. So in terms of the application process to McKinsey is of course one of the most competitive in the world, especially the case study portion. So what preparation and resources did you do to really help differentiate yourself in the case study part?
So that's a great question. So like I said, I'll share some of those resources with you, but I think the resources that you have should never be the limiting factor. I think there's so much out there, so many people doing so many things that there's always so many resources. It's more a question of prioritizing them and then using them well. I think I want to sort of call back to that third stage that I mentioned in the case prep that I think a lot of people gloss over. And I think that's what I did that helped me excel in the cases. In particular, so let me just repeat what that was. So you need to create a framework for yourself by which you expect the cases to be judged, right? So what I mean, there is a lot of these frameworks rolling around, right? You may have already seen some of them, you may already have them. Case Coach, which provides casing practice, they have their own version of it, which I'll share with the team as well, that they can share with you. I think that's a pretty good one. They have a few, I think, once again, I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think it's something like communication, quantitative skills, I don't know, there's 4 or 5 things, right? And what I would say is that a lot of people do their case prep and then they get some good qualitative feedback, but then it's not very actionable, right? So what I tried to do, what I did, right, is I created a version of that framework. At the end of every case, when I did that case, especially the last 10 or so, feedback, I figured out the exact things that I should have improved on. So generally it'll be 1 or 2 parts of the case that were slightly weaker. So maybe it was a quantitative part, or maybe it was the introduction where you create an issue tree. And then what I would do is I would go back to the basics, and rather than going to resources or anything, I would ask myself, okay, if I had all the time in the world, how would I answer this question? And then what can I do to be able to do that next time, right? So for example, maybe, just to give you an example, I remember I was struggling a lot with issue trees for industries which I wasn't familiar with. And so I realized there are a few ways there's a few sort of heuristics I could come up with that helped me excel there, right? And come up with good factors there. And one of them was simply creating parallels to the world that I know. So what I mean by that is, I remember I was asked about telecommunication networks, and that was one of the cases that I had, and I didn't really understand it, but I obviously know how Wi-Fi network works in my house, right? And I know that I need a Wi-Fi booster, right? And just knowing that I needed a Wi-Fi booster, I used that to say, okay, maybe these guys need a similar thing for telecommunications, right? More practically, it was a case where we were mapping out where they should be putting up their towers, and we basically said, I was basically just saying, okay, are there lower cost options like boosters that maybe we could put in corners and things like that, right? And that was a little bit creative. Once again, it could be completely wrong, but just because it was creative and just because it was well explained, the interview, I could literally, and Changez mentioned that they try not to show when they're impressed, but I could tell that at that moment, I could tell that he was like, okay, that's actually really interesting. And at the end of the case, he actually told me that that thing exists. I actually asked him, because they normally ask you like, oh, do you have any questions for us? Most people say, what's the boring thing in your job? And, do you love traveling and all that sort of stuff? I was like, okay, does this thing exist? And he was like, yeah, it exists and we use it. And I was like, I was just happy with myself, basically. Long answer once again, but really try and draw parallels. That stuff gets you really creative.
Cool. Any more questions for anyone? This honestly is a great opportunity because you have two experts here that can really give you great insights.
Yeah, I have a question. At the big four companies, it's a common trend to see people staying for a couple of years and leaving to go into smaller positions. Is that a common trend in smaller firms?
Yeah.
Or do people tend to stay longer?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I guess you kind of have to look at the rationale behind why, consultants within the big four have a relatively short tenure. And typically, if you identify trends as to where they go next, there'll be a product manager, a startup, or whatever it is, right? In my opinion, I think it's because of the lack of kind of, it's too structured, the promotion system. Put bluntly, at Elixir, it is a complete meritocracy. There's analysts that got promoted to consultants in 6 months and 3 months, and they reward their employees like that. And you're able to do so when you're such a small firm. I also think that at Elixir, you really have the freedom to dictate to a certain degree to dictate where you want to go and what you want to work on. Now, obviously, being an analyst, I have no flexibility, and I probably shouldn't have any flexibility in choosing what project I want to go on to. But what I mean by that is we've had employees at Elixir that have developed the venture capital arm of our firm. We've had employees at Elixir defining the acquisition strategy of our firm. We've had Elixir employees that have built the Endava product as well, and that's purely because of their own rationale. The employee satisfaction at our firm is quite solid. So the tenure, it's typical. It is around 5 years, but people stay a lot longer because they get rewarded a lot better, and they have the freedom to choose where they want to go at Elixir. Typically, when Elixir employees do leave, it is usually startups. So we say that we're a firm of entrepreneurs, and in my opinion, that's the entrepreneurial way of thinking. You're able to deal with ambiguity, etc. But they'll either go towards startups or they'll start their own. Or a few have gone into VC and private equity as well. But that is a long answer to something that I could be short. Rabii, do you have any opinion? Sorry.
In fact, there's something I want to mention, which is, so obviously I love McKinsey, yet to start, but have had good experiences so far. I just want to talk about Elixir very quickly. My limited experience with Elixir is one careers fair. And I remember very vividly, they had like MSH, and the guy was like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And people were, you can imagine Oxford students, they don't want to say anything rude in it. Yeah? And so they're just standing around, they're like, like coming up with some random acronyms. Yeah, I don't even know, man. Like it was just dead stuff, right? And I just randomly, I come in and I just shout, make shit happen, because it made sense, yeah? And then everyone was like, oh my God, he swore. And like, they were looking at me like weirdly. And then I remember, I don't know the guy's name, but there was a huge white guy.
Yeah.
And, he was just laughing, and great guy. And I had like a 10-minute chat with him. I never ended up applying for Elixir, but I think this point, sorry, man. I think this point, I doubt I would have got in, man. You had an assessment center with a 30-to-1 ratio. That's crazy. But one thing I want to say though is this point about like sort of lack of entrepreneurship at the larger firms. I definitely think that like, I wouldn't say maybe not lack of entrepreneurship, but it's a different type of entrepreneurship at these larger firms, right? There is a lot of scope to make your name in the firm and sort of network your way into things that you like, cases that you like, etc. But you would not be able to, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to, as an analyst, take charge of some of these new products or do something that innovative. And I do think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people say, okay, I'm going to do consulting and then I'm going to go into entrepreneurship. Yeah. And even for myself, I'm guilty of that. I think of those as two distinct things. I know I will be flexing an entrepreneurial muscle while I'm at the firm, but it will definitely not scratch the itch. And that's why I want to go into a startup in the medium term. In fact, in my head, I think I'm going to leave in the next 2 to 3 years, and I haven't even started yet, right? And so I understand exactly what you're talking about, and it probably I wouldn't be surprised if the tenure was, like you said, significantly longer, the average tenure. And so yeah, long story short, Elixir sounds cool, and I think a lot of what you said, I think a lot of people realize that quite quickly once they're at Big Four or MBB, and that's why they also often transition to startups as well, right?
Yeah. So I should have brought that up, but yeah, our slogan is "Make shit happen," which is pretty weird for a consultancy. But I was having a conversation with a partner actually this week, and I very bluntly asked, like, "Why the hell have you been here for 20 years? Like, what has kept you at this firm?" And he told me something that kind of stuck with me is my metric or the value I put that makes me stay is fun. I know it sounds immature, but that's exactly what he said. It's as long as I'm having fun, I'm going to stay. If I'm not having fun, I'm going to leave. And I think what we found, or I found personally at Elixir, is a lot of people are having a lot of fun. The teams are good. The culture is strong, particularly within the lower ranks. And the work we do is super interesting. Like, not all of it. Yes, we'll be developing target operating models for some companies. But, you know, a lot of it is really cool. Like, we recently built a banking app for, you know, one of our financial clients. So yeah, that's also why I think they stay a bit longer.
Well, guys, I think we're just about out of time. So that's really want to end by thank you both, Changez and Rabii, for giving up your time. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else learned a lot. And then, yeah, it's been a great event. So thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn if you guys need any advice, tips. Happy to help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, please do as well, because I'm trying to grow my connections. Like, I'm a new star. I have that 500 plus, but I want to grow it. Spam me with any questions about Elixir. I know we didn't get a really deep dive, and I'd be happy to actually jump on a call. So yeah. Thank you, in-state team as well. I think what you guys are doing is incredible, and I definitely would have found a lot of value in it as well.
Absolutely.
So
Well, have a lovely evening, everyone.
All right. Cool.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.